After 2 days of relative quiet since the presidential race was called, Donald Trump ramped things up this afternoon, announcing via Twitter, of course, that Defense Secretary Mark Esper has been terminated, immediately replaced by counterterrorism chief Christopher Miller. It's a move the president reportedly had wanted to make for months, especially after Esper publicly said back in June that he did not support Trump using active duty troops to control Black Lives Matter protesters. And the questions on the minds of many is, who will be the next to go? We'll get into that in much more detail later in the show. But for now, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are pushing full steam ahead with their transition plans as the newly minted president-elect and vice president-elect after an historic first appearance together on Saturday night.
We're seeing all over this nation, all cities and all parts of the country, indeed across the world, an outpouring of joy, of hope, renewed faith.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
And for many, the black Americans who've watched as ideals of white supremacy have been embraced and racial divides have widened across the nation. The hundreds of children who were brought across the border and now may never see their parents again. The so-called dreamers and asylum seekers who feared deportation every day. The Muslim Americans who've been ostracized and vilified. The military veterans and Gold Star families who've been forced to listen to talk of losers and suckers. The LGBTQ community who've been under constant attack. The disabled Americans who've been cruelly mocked and bullied. The environmental activists who've watched the rollback of more than 100 protection policies and the country's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords. And even other foreign leaders who've been unable to anticipate or even trust the promises and proclamations coming from America, too often in the form of tweets. For them, Saturday was the first real sense of relief in 4 years. And already Biden is getting down to work, putting in place a 13-member coronavirus task force, promising a process grounded in science. Do you believe he had to say that? And while he celebrated today's news from Pfizer of a vaccine the company says looks to be 90% effective in early analysis, Biden also noted it'll be many months before we see widespread vaccination, and we all need to do our part now.
As we work toward a safe and effective vaccine, we know the single most effective thing we can do to stop the spread of COVID is wear a mask. This is a crisis that affects everyone. It's time to end the politicization of basic, responsible public health steps like mask wearing and social distancing. We have to come together to heal the soul of this country so that we can effectively address this crisis.
Not quite the sentiment we've been hearing from the top lately, even as confirmed COVID cases in the U.S. hit 10 million today, with more than 56,000 people in hospitals, 11,000 plus of whom are in ICUs, according to the COVID Tracking Project. And as big a crisis as that is for the incoming president, it's being made all the more difficult by the current president's refusal to concede and help usher in the transition of power. Still, Biden and his team are forging on. Now joined by a man who's helped guide a presidential transition or two himself, David Gergen. David served as an advisor to Presidents Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton, and is now with the Harvard Kennedy School. David, great to see you as always.
Good to see you, Jeff.
So the good news is Biden is already at work. The bad news, no cooperation from the current administration, and some unknown bureaucrat at the General Services Administration won't turn on the spigot for money to flow to the transition effort. How big a problem are both those things?
Well, the fact that the General Services Administration won't turn over the keys is significant because Biden only has 10 weeks to get the launch. And in January 20th, he gets underway regardless of where things stand. And those 10 weeks are precious, Jim. You need every moment there to go into the various agencies, send in teams to interview the people who are there now in all these different agencies across the government, to get recommendations about people, about policies and that sort of thing. That is not happening now. The Biden people are ready to go with those teams, but that is not happening. What the Biden people have been good about is they foresaw that the GSA might drag its heels. And so the Biden committee realized that the money that normally goes to fund a transition, usually up to $10 million, provided by the government, pays for the salaries of people in transition and the like. That money is being withheld. And the Biden people have already launched fundraising drive before this, so they have some money in reserve to cover that. That's, I think, shows the professionalism of the group that's coming in. There are a lot of these people who have been through these issues before and they're experienced, and they're going to bring I think, a much greater sense of competence, capacity than what we've been seeing the last 4 years.
You know, one way or another, January 20th is going to come, and I don't know, Sean Hannity may swear in Donald Trump, but a justice, I'm sure, is going to swear in Joe Biden.
Yes.
You wrote a piece for the Globe, Can He Govern? Let me go on the list of things that seems to me are the potential obstacles for that. Quickly, if we can. One, Mitch McConnell remains the leader of the Senate, assuming the Democrats don't win both of those elections in Georgia. Is there any reason to think that Mitch McConnell won't keep being Mitch McConnell?
Well, there is one element that is encouraging, and that is in the past, Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden have actually had a good working relationship. They've called each other friends. Interestingly, Jim, I did not know this. When at the burial of Beau Biden, the prized son of Joe Biden, there was one Republican senator who went to that burial service, and that was Mitch McConnell.
I did not know that.
I did not know that either, and that gave me encouragement. At the same time, word is coming out of the Biden camp that he wants to put an even tighter rein on Joe Biden than he had put on Obama. And as you know, he wanted to bring Obama down. That was the main purpose from day one. And there have been indications that tight rein that McConnell wants to have a veto power and exercise that veto power for every single member of the Biden cabinet. Now, that's unheard of. We've never had anything like that. It's always been a presumption that a new president was entitled to pick his own team.
Sure.
And unless you're totally in the mainstream or you have all sorts of ethical problems, everybody has been confirmed. It would be outrageous and I think very, very damning if Mitch McConnell does that, exercises that kind of power.
So item number 2, dissent in his own party. You have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez giving a very tough interview to the New York Times, basically warning the administration not to mess around with progressives, include them. And you have people like Connor Lamb, a moderate from Pennsylvania, saying all that radical talk about defunding the police, that's why we didn't do so well last week. Right. Is that a battle that Joe Biden can deal with?
He's one of the only people, I think, who can handle something like that, who has the negotiating capacity and the empathy to do that. And I think that's one of the things that bodes well for Biden, that he has that capacity. But this split between the moderates and progressives is very real. There was a phone call that's been reported this past week. It was a couple of hours with the House caucus, the progressives and the moderates. Mm-hmm. And they got into shouting matches in there. Because the moderates feel very strongly that they lost some members and came within a hair's breadth of just losing some more. Because the right was able to put out the word, this is all socialism. It's going to lead us down the garden path to socialism. But at the same time, the progressives feel, with justification, that they kept their mouths shut during the campaign, did not push on their proposals, but with the understanding they would do it after the election was over. How do you reconcile those two things with your cross pressures? I think it's going to be one of the toughest problems that Biden faces, but also I think he's one of the people most qualified, most capable of meeting it.
Well, I also don't know how you reconcile it when every dollar that would be needed for the progressive policies that Joe Biden evolved into supporting would require eliminating the tax cuts for the wealthy handed out by Donald Trump. That's not going to pass in a Mitch McConnell Senate.
The issue is that so many things may be sent to a graveyard over in Mitch McConnell's office. And they'll just die, like the taxes. But that is a real issue. These are real issues.
Obstacle 3, 70 million voters who didn't have to just listen to candidate Trump's promises, but saw what Donald Trump delivered and said, "You're my man." What happens with them?
Well, I think that is a big question. The way the president is acting now, the childish behavior we're seeing out of the Oval Office, almost like he's trying to, was one story this week that he was going to barricade himself in the Oval Office. You see that and you realize that Trump doesn't want to leave the stage. He may be out of office, but he does not want to leave the stage. And I do think we're seeing the makings of a revitalized base that he will be in charge of, and he will be Mr. Republican. Indeed, he will try to become a shadow president. I think that's a very real danger. We've never had that before. but it could be debilitating for Biden. What the president is doing right now, I don't know whether he thinks he can win these lawsuits or not, but he is really sowing the seeds for people who believe that this was a stolen election at the left, that the Democrats stole this election, which is totally unfair and totally inaccurate. And they still haven't produced the evidence. We were supposed to see lawsuits by the end of the day today, with the evidence. The lawsuits haven't been filed. What does that tell us?
Well, Rudy Giuliani is busy working with that convicted sex offender in Pennsylvania, so he's too busy to deal with. David, it is the most over-asked question about the GOP and its leaders, so to speak. But I'll tell you, I assume the two critical steps to getting things moving were, one, Joe Biden continuing to say what he says relentlessly. I was elected as a proud Democrat, but I will serve all Americans. Check that box off. But also for Republican leaders not to say we're buying into your agenda, but at minimum saying we accept your legitimacy. If anything, people like Lindsey Graham are fanning the flames that are being lit by Donald Trump. I don't get this at all. It almost seems suicidal in some ways for the Republican Party. Why would you want to offend? It's one thing to stir up your base. It's another thing to give deep offense to everybody else, including independents, because you're so selfish and so self-centered. So the person who's being hurt the most right now by this is Donald Trump. He is believe that we've never had him leave the office in this way. For 200 years, people have left the office graciously and with grace, and they've supported their successor even though they didn't agree with that person. That's a long-standing tradition. It goes all the way back to George Washington. Washington felt strongly about it, and all other presidents have honored it. So we are making history, but the wrong kind of history. I think historians will puzzle for years. How in the heck did we ever get to this point with this kind of man running things in this way? Will those same historians say that Donald Trump is the worst president we've had?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was with a scholar, household name, the other day, and we got into that conversation, and he said he was having a big debates with his friends. Is Donald Trump the worst, or was Andrew Johnson the worst? Well, it came down to two.
So, David, you've spent a lifetime giving advice to presidents. If this president-elect were to approach you and said, give me a few minutes and tell me how to deal with all these obstacles that you and Jim Braude just laid out on his television show, what would you tell Joe Biden?
I would tell him the most important thing is to be authentic, to be himself as a way, and be completely honest and transparent as a way to rebuild trust. I think we have to open the door to higher levels of trust across parties, within parties. From people who are supporting Donald Trump, people not supporting Donald Trump. We in Cambridge and Boston area, we do live in something of a bubble here. We have to be part of a process of trying to understand the people who lost, the people who are running. I think it's unfathomable to us, many of us. How could 60+ million people vote knowingly for Donald Trump for a second term? It was one thing to be an accidental president, aberrational president, but it's a totally different picture when you elect him twice. It says more about you than it says about him. And so we have to be, we need to do some soul searching of our own. It's not just about policy. It is about the civic culture and improving the civic culture so we can work with each other through these crises. Not since FDR, we had any president who's inherited as many deep crises as Joe Biden has. But he has a weak hand, given all these other things. And that's concerning. I think over time, he can build up a level of trust. Mm-hmm. It won't happen overnight, but it can be done. I was there when Nixon left, and we thought we'd never see, the light again. And Jerry Ford comes in. He's a healer. And by golly, things change. People, country calm down. And Ford gets a lot of credit in terms of his legacy. So I think that can be done again. I'll tell you this to finish. I don't want to talk on too long. If you had to look for one person from the political world who might be able to bring us back together, I really do believe it's Joe Biden. It's just hard to figure out in power in office or something like that, he might be another person. There are not many individuals out there that you can point to and say, that person can ultimately rally the country.
I hope you're right, David Gergen. And speaking of soul searching, I've got to do some because I just referred to myself in the third person. Got to fix that. David Gergen, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for your time.
Good to see you, sir.
Be well.
Thank you.